Stop! You can't turn those on! It's madness to make the opposition that strong!
Madness.
This is Transistor!
Hey, look.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, I am SocioPsycho and this is Mob Reviews, and today we are going to look at Transistor. This was created by Supergiant Games, available for PC, Mac, and Linux. Now, Supergiant Games has also created Bastion, and they do have a similar post-apocalyptic theme, but they are completely different games. How much of expectations from one good game can be expected from Transistor? And that's what we'll dive into here today. Exactly how well does Transistor pull off what it's intending to? And we'll begin in the option menu. Now, in the options menu, you have brightness, which is very nice to see because sometimes it may be too dark, and the sound volume sliders are split up on different categories, so if one is too loud, you're able to fix that with ease. Now, the music in the game is actually quite well done, and so much to the point where it has this title on Steam of a great soundtrack. It's one of its proclaimed factors in the game. But the difference here with the music in between something like Bastion is that the music, while it's good, it doesn't intertwine with the elements of the game. Yes, the music keeps throughout the course of the game. It keeps the momentum, the atmosphere, and everything else, but it's not hand in hand with the experience through the majority of the game. At the end of the game, yes, the music plays its role in the finishing of a story, just as you would expect in any game. But if you're expecting music on the same par of an interactive, woven-in mentality, you're not exactly going to get it. Now, that doesn't take away from how good the soundtrack is in the game, but the expectation of it being more wrapped in with the game mechanics is something that you have to let go of because it doesn't have that to the degree as something as Bastion did, where the elements of the world and the feelings of the environment are expressed through more narrational sound. I feel I could have taken a page from that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in story, just like we will with voice, because the voice acting in the game is done well, but we'll cover those in story. When we go to controls, you have availability from keyboard, mouse, and controller. All the keys are easily rebindable with no issues on that front. And you have a large berth of screen resolutions, which is always nice to see. The game, performance-wise, has been running at 60 frames per second with no tearing, clipping, or crashing. I've not had any performance issues in any regard. Graphically, the game is very simplistic. It's not taxing or a heavy rendering element. It is not bad though. It is a very artistic feel. They went more for an abstract, and the game plays in a sci-fi element, which the closest relative feeling, not exactly theme or story, but just a base feeling, would be Ghost in a Shell, the animated series, if you are aware of that. It sort of has this resemblance of that in a completely different atmosphere, in a completely different story. But the world is also post-apocalyptic, and you have to traverse this very beautiful world, although graphically it is simplistic. So in traversing this world, what does that entail? And we're going to begin with talking about combat. Now, the combat in the game is something that can be a little confusing at first, because it's divided in a hack and slash mentality in a very baseline with, or paired with, a turn-based regenerative time style. Now, what exactly does that mean? Now, you're not going to be flying around the map all crazy willy-nilly, doing giant combos and racking up kill points and things like that. You have these abilities. Now, when we jump into what these abilities are and why I'm going to cover these, is because this really is the majority of the combat first, more than anything else. To understand what is happening on the screen, more than just, oh wow, you attacked and that thing died, you have to understand the abilities you have available in order to attack. And this is sort of where some of the confusion can really come from, because while the interface you can get used to, jumping into the game from a first time experience, it's not exactly the easiest thing to understand. As you progress through the game, you learn more, but so much becomes unlocked to you in the beginning that it can be almost overwhelming, and a confusion upon how to properly use or build as you don't really have a direction or understand that you're going to obtain more abilities as the time progresses through as you level up. And this can lead to one of the bigger factors of people leaving the game earlier on, because it's a frustration of combat in the beginning that might discourage them from not being able to defeat their opponents. So when we look at this and we pop up the ability transition combat augmentations, what we have here are 2 rows. Now when we click over this first one, Crash, you can see it has 3 active capabilities. Active slot effectiveness. Now if we look below and you see 1, 2, 3, and 4 below that, these are your active abilities. When we bump out of this ability, you can see I have these 4 abilities and I'm able to use them with ease throughout the game. Beyond just selecting 4 abilities though, as you have 16, it's the integration of these abilities having more properties which allow a level of depth. Now when we go over to the second slot, you have upgrade slot effect. Cause most functions to stun and disrupt targets. Now that means if we go over to this third ability, and we say, okay, this third ability is active, so we want to put it in our number 1 slot. We install that there. And we go back to our first ability, which was Crash, and we say upgrade slot. Well, now we want to add that as a augmentation, as you can see below here. And it will say, well, okay, this is what it will do for this ability in the upgrade capability. Now you just tied 2 individual augments to each other, creating something more, creating something even more powerful than the sum of its parts. And as you progress through these different abilities, you'll see that they each do different things in their active slot, so it's really up to you to decide, okay, well, I want to use this as its standard attack, and then support it with something that I think might really benefit that capability. And you can create through 16 different transitioning augments for the weapon something a little bit more unique, something maybe perhaps more to what you feel individually or personally. And there's also a passive slot effect, which allows the individual abilities to give you a passive if you install it on the side. So as you can see on the side here, we have 4 capabilities, 3 unlocked, and we increase it here. This means a shield will pop around my character and deflect a certain number of the attacks coming in against me. Now you also have a capability to inspect each one of these individual capabilities, and they give a little bit of lore on the subject of the character in question, or the augment in question, and the active, upgrade, passive capabilities in its base stat understanding. So as you can see, it's a little bit confusing at first to understand, okay, well, what are these? How can I interlock them together? And what am I able to do? Now, as I said, when you progress through the game, there is some leeway as the game progresses, because you understand, hey, maybe I can make it better if I do this, or maybe I can do a combination. And this difficulty does give way as you progress through the game more, and you experience more abilities, more open up to you, and you combine in different ways to try to create something unique or more proficient to your playstyle. There's also this little safe area that you have the availability to travel to throughout the game. You'll come across backdoor access on certain levels, and you can get to. They are not exactly save points. The saving in the game is done by access points or moving to a new location. So when you enter this little getaway land, there are some challenging missions in here, but there's also a practice room. So you can go to this practice room and combine these different abilities, these different traits, and really try to find something unique, find something that is to your playstyle. But there may be some discrepancy when it comes to a playstyle. Now, I really like that all these different augmentations can be intertwined to the character, and one ability that makes you increase in damage might, on its passive, give you a defense bonus. So you pick and choose exactly how you want to build your character in order to try to survive. But in my experience through the game, and this may just be because of short-sightedness on my part, I didn't really build the best weapon augmentational capability. When you come to a boss, and there's about 3 or 4 bosses in this game, this freedom of choice, this availability to create something unique, to play to your playstyle kind of falls by the wayside, and it becomes obvious or evidential that you need to go for a more standard high DPS yield build, because anything short of that is really going to make it a lot more of a pain in your butt. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, you have an ability called Help. Help summons a friend, a little mechanical dog, which will attack your opponent. It's not the strongest, and it's not going to survive against the majority of creatures by itself, and that in its own right is fine because it adds balance. But when you build, say, a structure around a control, minimum DPS, and support creatures, and you go to fight a boss, the pet is pretty useless, and pretty useless to absolutely useless, to be fair. While you need a certain level of difficulty in the bosses and a certain level of give and take in the fights, whether it be a shortcoming in some of these augments to allow a combat strength of their own, or if it's just on my folly, but my experience is the pets, the summons, and certain abilities do not work as well against certain enemies. And like I said, that's fine because it offers a level of difficulty. And you would expect to offload that difficulty with a level of strategy, but instead it becomes resemblance of you need to build the correct build to get out from under this fight, which means you have to use one of the 4 top tier abilities to really make heavy defense and high DPS, rather than enjoying the playstyle that you've played and cleaned out all the trash in between the fights. So you go through the entire game in between the bosses, exploring the levels, killing all the trash mobs, getting through all the minions, and you hone your build, you make it more powerful and strengthen up your character to get to these bosses and find out that your build that you've been playing with doesn't exactly cut it, and you have to scrap it and redo it. Is it hard by that point to scrap and redo? No. Is it detrimental to the game? Absolutely not. But it's one of those things where the availability of choice isn't as plentiful as it first seems. And this is really unfortunate because they do in the game have a capability to increase the difficulty as you progress through the game. When you level up, not only will you get new abilities to increase your power and you really feel like, hey, I'm growing, I'm becoming more efficient, I have more options and capabilities to build my character, but you also get to choose in between upgrades to increase the difficulty as well. So when we look at that, you can see that this first one, the process will spawn shielded cells when terminated. Now if you do not kill these shielded cells, the enemy that you just killed that the cells spawned from will respawn the monster that you just killed. So it's very important to get rid of those. The process will strike with twice as much power, i.e. doing more damage. Sometimes spawn twin cells when terminated, which means a higher chance of an enemy resurrecting. And as you can see, this continuational progress of difficulty, which offers a very clear line for the player in how they want to progress, how risky they want to be, or how good do they think they are. And I like that. I like the availability upon increasing your skill and increasing your character to the difficulty of the game also increasing as well. And like I said, outside of the boss fights, I found the balance of the game during the combat sections to be fine. It's only when you come to those bosses that you soon realize that build that you've been working on is complete rubbish, and that you have to get one of the standard builds because you need that certain level of DPS and you can't arc around with ease a secondary way. So by understanding that the capabilities that you take into battle are not a set of, hey, you made it to tier 2, now you get to swing your sword with +5 damage, but it adds an entire new element to it, that how you experience the game is indicative to how your personality type is. Unfortunately, some of that gets stepped on at certain points. But the combat is split up by a turn-style free range capability. When we go into combat, you can see that when you press spacebar, you have the availability to make action moves. And at the top of the page, these action moves, depending on what ability you're pressing, take a certain chunk of that out. Now the thing is, after you do this action, which can be good to close gaps, to get away, to do burst damage on an enemy that moves around so much because it slows down the time, after you use it, the bar has to recharge and you cannot attack until then. You can still use some passive things like hide in shadows but doing damage is something that you can't do, which is by all means makes sense. You're fatigued. Now the entire combat system is rotated around this understanding that you will need to use the slow time movement and tactically place your attacks. It doesn't give you an unfair advantage. It doesn't feel cheap. It's not like in some first-person shooters where you slow down the time with adrenaline and you take out 5 enemies with your gun. No, the way it's done is very tactically based, and some of the enemies' difficulties play right off of that. So it's never a point where the mechanic ends up feeling like cheese. And that is very important because when your entire gameplay is circumvented around this one mechanic, you damn well better sure that that mechanic is done right. And they've managed to accomplish that. The ease of access to get around, to get away, to be able to escape or attack is done with a simplistic beauty. Which brings us to the story. The story of the game is a bit confusing, and it's a little hard to get into at first. And as we talked about with the combat being right in your face with a lot of information and very little explanation, it can be a little daunting or a little too much to take in all at once. It can be a bit much. The story doesn't wrap itself around the character though, and there is really no relatability. Not, oh, I'm playing as a female character, I'm a man, I can't relate to a female. Not like that. But in the environment, in the character's actions, the what exactly is going on. It's not amnesia, but it just doesn't really tell you. It doesn't arc the way. And you can kind of piece the story together as you progress through the game, but at the end, you have a rough understanding of what's going on, but real no emotional involvement with the character herself. Now that doesn't mean the story is bad, because your character, the female protagonist, doesn't say anything. In the story, they have taken her voice. I'm not exactly sure how this is done, and I don't believe that they cover this, but the main character has lost her voice. And the weapon, the Transistor weapon, which allows you to do all these interesting combat things, has your boyfriend's or partner's person you care about, his essence, trapped into a sword, because that's a thing, it's capable of doing that. So while the main character does not talk throughout the adventure, your companion does. And at some point, it becomes a little too much. Because your main character, while she does not talk, sometimes you can say more by saying less. And with the main character, this is exactly on verbatim. You understand her, you get a sense of her burden, her loss, her weight, her understanding of a world, her playfulness, through the different images they show, through how she reacts to certain things in text-based replies, but she doesn't say anything. And you can get this understanding. Now, with your companion, who starts out in the weapon that you have, the Transistor weapon, he seems more or less cognitive. And as the game progresses, he becomes less of himself, more fragmented. The time is taking its toll, the experiences and the combat and the story are making him slip away in certain elements and parts. But at many points, you don't feel a real connection with this character, this man character, and he talks way too much. If you've ever been around somebody who just won't shut up gabbing and you just want to slap him in the face, that's sort of what this guy has. Luckily, it breaks it up just enough to avoid that, but it comes damn well close. And there's no real emotional connection with him. At the end of the story, which I won't spoil for you, but at the end of the story, the emotional climax, the finalization, and the close to tear-jerking moment doesn't come from a guy. It comes from your main character. So it's not that he overstayed his welcome, but he didn't really add anything to the emotional flux of the story arc. He played his role in helping understand what's going on, but in being an intricate part of making you feel for him, making you really just be like, man, that sucks. What's happening? I gotta save you. Or don't worry, hold on, we're gonna get this fixed. It doesn't hit that way. And that's why at the end you get a little teary eye, or maybe depending on, personality, you might full out cry, because the heavy emotional climax of the story comes from a female, your character, not him. Now, most of these missed opportunities in the story do come from the fact that he talks too much, and there's no music arc like you would hope for in Bastion in this game. There are some parts. It's not 100% without music integration into the game in a mechanical sense. There's about 10%. But that's not enough to really tie the player in to make you feel like this character I care about, this character I'm really enthralled with, and I really want to see that this happens to the best capability. And part of the reason why you don't get that sensational feeling is because you really have a hard time understanding what's going on. You understand as you progress through the game that the city is deteriorating in a post-apocalyptic feel in a sci-fi computer virus element, but it's not really clear upon why you should care more than you are the hero of this adventure. And you believe in the beginning that maybe I'm the victim and I've been spun into this situation where I need to overthrow these madmen. But then these madmen don't really seem that mad, and you don't really seem like a victim. So are you the hero? Or are you just somebody with a weapon that has the capability to stop this madness from spreading? And how did you get that weapon to begin with? There's a lot of unanswered questions in this game, and a lot of confusion as the game arcs forward. The voice acting is good, as I said, and I'll let you hear that for yourself now.
They got greedy. Grant and the others. Only one left. He's gotta know something. Out there somewhere in Fairview. We're making good time. Hi. You turned left. Thought we were gonna skip town. We're going back there. You met these things. They do not have a sense of humor. They will track you down, wipe you out, and take whatever's left of me back to those 2-bit Camerata pieces of trash. Look, whatever you're thinking, do me a favor. Don't let me go.
When you speak, I hear silence. Every word a defiance. I can hear, oh, I can hear. Think I'll go where it suits me. Moving now to the country with everyone.
So at the end of the day, how does the game manage? The combat and the choice in the availability you have is fine. It's a little rough to get a handle on. The interface takes some finagling with. You really have to dive into it and experiment with it if you really want to get the most out of what you can, or read perhaps a guide for the top DPS build. But while there is a certain wall to understanding the interface, it's not so high that it's game breaking. And while it is unfortunate that the vast customizational options you have available to you in the interchangeable capabilities don't allow you to really express the individual support, tank, or DPS mindset, and it makes you have to fall back on DPS. It is a punch to the gut, but it's not game breaking. You can fall into a row, you can kind of find a medium, pump up maybe if you're going support with a mind control and pet summons and dodging and shadow walking. You can beef up DPS a little bit here and there and make it work, but it is obvious that if you want to be the most effective, you're going to need to use the most powerful DPS capabilities that it has. There is no stalling for time or using defensive capabilities to sort of tank your way through the game, and there's not enough weight in the support categories to manipulate the environment to meet your mastermind type deals. So unfortunately, it does come down to more of just blow open the door and kill everything in with a spread of high DPS. Doesn't mean that the game's less fun, but does take away that choice slightly. And the story is abstract. It's confusing, it's confounding, but it's good. Is this game legendary? No. It missed that mark. But it's very good, and it deserves the high rate of positive value that it has on Steam. But the shortcomings in not really bridging the gap between the player and the characters, and not really making you feel like you're part of a world rather than just a bystander who's exploring the world, as if you were coming into a movie halfway in, and you don't know who people are, the backstories, what's going on, and everything else, but doesn't hide behind a developmental wall of amnesia as well. So it's just blatantly, in this confusion. But the story squeaks by enough to where it enthralls you with curiosity and everything else. And if it looks interesting to you, if everything you've seen so far looks interesting, the combat looks enjoyable, as it is a play plus mode, so after you beat the game once, you'll be able to go into the game a second time and play through it. The enemies will be stronger, it will match the level that you are on, but you'll be able to do it again, maybe on hard difficulty, with new abilities, new customization, and you'll maybe look at things that you missed last time. But if all of that looks good, the story is not a detriment to the game. It doesn't wrap you in and keep you warm and fuzzy and safe and say this is what's going on and make you feel a sense of euphoric. But it barely misses the what the fuck, you're just annoying the shit out of me. And because it misses that, it glides on this element of, okay, well, let's see what happens next. Let's see what goes on next. And the game is not overly long, so it doesn't outstay its welcome, because the story is a little weak in that regard. So it's just the right length to where by the time you're getting maybe, come on, let's finish it up, or what's going on, and get to the point, it finishes, and you're good. And the ending of the game makes it worth it. If you enjoyed the game and you trudging through, the end of the game does make your eyes water, or maybe even teary-eyed, big soppy man tears, depending on the person. I can easily recommend this game. I enjoyed it. I would have liked to see, a couple things switched here and there, but it's not bad. I hope this has been a help to you. I've been SocioPsycho. This has been Mob Reviews, and I'll see you next time.
Even out the patches that we've sown.